Welcome students. This is the orientation for students who will be completing the first practicum for the Memorial University School Social Work BSW program, Social Work 3300. Please don't hesitate to contact a member of the field team if you have any remaining questions, queries, or concerns. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy this great learning experience as you complete the first practicum of your BSW program. Throughout the orientation, we'll be talking about an overview of field education, what it is, what do students learn, what you need to know. The requirements prior to your practicum, as well as orientation to your practicum, requirements during practicum, and the expectations of students, field instructors, and agency mentors, as well as where to find key resources and documents, evaluations to be completed, and how to get answers to any questions you may have. Field education is known as social work signature pedagogy. Signature pedagogy represents a central form of instruction and learning in which a profession such as social work socializes its students to perform the role of practitioner. Field education is the component of the curriculum in which students achieve understanding of the relevance of theory to practice and begin to develop competence in using their values, knowledge, and skills. So field practicums really are an opportunity for you as a student to move from the classroom setting into the field and into practice. As you can see in the diagram developed by Larkin on the slides, we have three cogs. One is field, one is classroom, and one is competent generalist practitioner. And what that means is that for social work as a profession, we have classroom education, but we also have field education. So a social worker cannot truly be educated without having both in their training. Field education truly is a critical bridge between social work education and practice. This is the opportunity to take the critical knowledge, skills, and values you developed in the classroom and then move through your practicums to strengthen and further develop those skills and knowledge in the field. There are a few things to consider in regards to the purposes and objectives of field education. Further details can be found in the Field Education Manual. An important element of field practicums is that the practicum experience is not just about doing tasks and learning the specific job in an agency or specific forms that need to be completed. These aspects can change 100 times throughout your career. BSW field practicums are instead designed to serve as an educational rather than a training or work experience. Field education is about learning to become a social worker. Practicums and field instruction assist students in making the transition from active learners to professional social workers, with professional socialization being a primary focus of field education, as students develop a professional self-concept. Field education is also the critical component of the curriculum in which students achieve understanding of the relevance of theory to practice and begin to develop competence in using their values, knowledge, and skills. So both field practicums really are an opportunity for you as a student to move from the classroom setting into the field and into practice. During the practicum, students are expected to further develop professional values, professional identity, and skills in the art of helping. It is also important for students to know that both the BSW and MSW field programs at Memorial are designed to ensure that field practica meet the Canadian Association of Social Work Education standards for accreditation. So if you're looking for some more information on the Canadian Association of Social Work Education, please check out their website and we have attached the link there for you. So let's talk about some of the people that you'll be in contact with during your practicum. First, there's the field education coordinators here at the School of Social Work. So we are the people who help you coordinate and arrange your practicum from the start to the end of the process. Your field liaison is a person who is assigned to you throughout the term who will be in contact with you at various points to see how things are going. If there are any questions or concerns, one of the field education coordinators here at the school will be your field liaison, and you'll be advised as to who that person is. There is an agency coordinator at your agency. It could be the person that oversees the practicum for many students. So at Newfoundland Labrador Health Services, for example, there's an individual who coordinates all the practicums during a given semester, or it could be at a smaller agency. It could be the executive director of the agency. A field instructor is a person who has been assigned to supervise you throughout your practicum. The field instructor will be a social worker who will be either a BSW or MSW, and they will be responsible for helping you with your learning contract, as well as your weekly supervision, your midterm, and your final evaluation. At your agency, there may also be an agency mentor. For example, in some of our agencies, we don't have social workers on site, or the field instructor may not be on site. So the agency mentor may be assigning the tasks to you on a daily basis. They're your go-to person, and we may have a field instructor outside the agencies providing the weekly supervision and evaluation. So you will be advised of that before the semester starts. The student is you, of course, and that is a registered student at the School of Social Work. And as well, service users are individuals, families, communities, groups, volunteers who use the services of an agency that you may be working with during the semester. Just some things for students to keep in mind prior to starting your practicum. If you have not already done so, please read and sign the Student School BSW Field Practicum Agreement and upload it to IPT. It can be found on the School of Social Work Field website. You also have to complete all agency requirements before you can start the practicum. Your field education coordinator can provide you with direction on the requirements for your particular agency. Most agencies will require that you complete a certificate of conduct and vulnerable sector check. Other agencies may have additional requirements such as a child protection clearance check, immunization records, certain training sessions, or other screening requirements. It is very important to have these documents submitted by the deadline provided by your agency. If not, it may result in a delay in your placement and delay in pay if you have a paid placement. Submitting your documents on time also gets your relationship with your agency off to a good start. Please also take the time to read over the BSW Field Practicum Checklist for students, as well as the BSW Field Manual and the Field Education Resource Manual, as well as the Significant Dates document. These 4 documents contain everything you will need to know throughout your practicum. It will be a great resource for you if you have any questions before or during your practicum. Prior to your placement, the field team will be providing updates through your MUN email, so please make sure that you keep an eye on your MUN email. Here are some things you need to know about your placement. The practicum is normally 4 days per week. This can be altered if the field instructor, agency, student, and school agree. Most students work from Monday to Thursday or Tuesday to Friday, and that may change depending on the agency. You work out your schedule with your field instructor. Usually students have an 8:30 to 4:30 or 9 to 5 arrangement, and some students will complete placement hours in the evenings and weekends. During the placement, you follow the schedule of the agency, which means you will not get a midterm break. To meet accreditation standards, you have to complete a total of 350 hours in the practicum, which does not include stat holidays, missed time, sick leave, lunch breaks, or weather-related closures. If you're away from your placement for more than 3 days, inform your field liaison of your absence. Special absences should also be discussed with the field liaison and the field instructor in advance. If you know at the beginning of the term you will need time off for any reason, that must be discussed with the field instructor and field liaison in advance. The practicum is usually 11 to 13 weeks, and under certain circumstances, placements can be longer than 13 weeks. However, it cannot be less than 11 weeks. If you complete the 350 hours in less than 11 weeks, you have to continue to attend practicum for the full 11 weeks. It is also important to keep in mind that field instructors and agencies are not expected to accommodate any other activities, such as your employment and volunteer work. While you are completing your first practicum, you will be doing a course, which is Social Work 3311, Social Work Integration Theory and Practice. This course does not count as part of the 350 required practicum hours. Since your practicum is usually 4 days a week, you will have 1 day during the week to work on your course. Time for attendance at class can be sorted out with your field instructor if your section is at a time you would normally be in placement. Prior to your practicum, it is important to get in touch with your field instructor or agency mentor a couple of weeks before the start date of the practicum, so you can find out any important logistical details regarding your practicum, such as office location, when to arrive, office hours, dress code, what to bring, and where to park if you are driving yourself. If the contact person is on leave, connect with someone else at the agency. Once you get into your practicum setting, it is important to participate in your agency's orientation. Some agencies will have a formal orientation checklist that they will give you, and then it is your responsibility to ensure that all the items are covered off. Some agencies will have a formal orientation in place that you will have to attend, or you may have to complete certain modules online. Some orientations may be more informal and involve a conversation with your field instructor or a supervisor at the agency. So each agency is going to be a little different. Introduce yourself to agency staff and volunteers and become familiar with their roles within the organization. Some of the key contact people at your agency could be your field instructor, administrative staff, your agency mentor, agency supervisors, volunteers, and other agency personnel. It is also important to ask questions about agency expectations, such as technology use, reporting absences, safety procedures, confidentiality, and documentation requirements. Safety is a key component of any orientation. Most agencies will have formal processes in place around fire and safety and those sorts of things. If your agency is a smaller agency and they do not have a formal fire or safety process in place, it is important to find out what to do in case of an emergency. So in the first week or so, it's important to find out that information, what to do if there's a fire or other emergencies such as violence or if there's a medical emergency. In terms of agency policies, some agencies may have a formal agency policy manual, and you will be asked to go through it and take a look at it. It is sometimes helpful to jot down any questions you might have, and it's completely understandable that you're not going to be familiar with everything after looking at a policy manual, but you may look at some things and then they remind you for a question you may have later on in your practicum when it has more relevance to you. Agency etiquette is also very important. What is the dress code? What's appropriate to say when you answer the phone? What's the appropriate response to service users on certain questions? So all those kinds of things. Having a little notebook around and jotting down questions as they come up or making a note in your phone can be really helpful. Then when you have a chance to meet with your field instructor or mentor, you can have a list of questions to ask them. We're now going to talk about the expectations of all students throughout their practicum. Most of these expectations will be discussed more in depth shortly. We expect that you are going to participate actively in your own learning in the practicum, ask questions, be curious, put yourself inside your comfort zone, take on as many learning opportunities as possible to meet the outcomes and individual learning objectives identified in your learning contract. Also, ask for feedback and be open to feedback. Students are also expected to refer to and follow the guidelines in the BSW Field Education Manual, as well as the other helpful resources. Some of these resources include the Significant Dates document, checklist for students, guide to developing a strong learning contract, as well as the Field Education Resource Manual. You will also continue to review the agency policies and procedures throughout the practicum. During your practicum, you will engage in a minimum of 1 hour of weekly field instruction with your field instructor, as well as complete the learning contract with your field instructor. You will also be expected to complete various required practice experiences as well as required practicum documentation. We also expect students to participate in the evaluation of self as well as evaluation of the field practicum. This will be discussed in more depth as well throughout the orientation. And of course, students are expected to uphold the CASW Code of Ethics throughout their practicum. We do have expectations of field instructors, and we are going to let you know what those are as well. The field instructor assumes a major teaching role with students in the integration of theory and practice in the field. They facilitate student learning through introduction of new theories, knowledge, and research developments relevant to social work practice in the field setting. The field instructor may assign work to you, particularly if you have an on-site field instructor. This could involve the selection of cases, groups, and other activities to provide appropriate learning experiences for students. They have to make time to be a field instructor as well, and part of this involves working with you to develop a learning contract, as well as meeting at least once a week for field instruction. They must review the self-assessments, critical reflection journals, and discuss other requirements of the practicum. And also, field instructors are asked to meet a minimum of an hour a week, but some students may need additional field instruction, depending on the week. This normally isn't an issue, but if you are not getting regular field instruction, you should let us know as your field liaison. Because one of the things we want to make sure is that theory and skills are integrated with practice during this experience. Field instructors also provide consultation and supervision of tasks as needed, and they review student documents and reports. And they also evaluate the student performance, and they are also required to be in consultation with the field liaison throughout the semester to provide regular updates on how students are doing in their practicum. They also must alert the student and the field liaison as to any concerns and issues. We would expect that to be the process where field instructors are working with you in terms of the practicum and identifying if there are any concerns. In an agency where we would not have an on-site field instructor, we usually have an agency mentor. They would provide day-to-day supervision and guidance for a student. We would also expect them to be involved and work in a collaborative way with the field instructor to ensure a rich experience for students. They may also assign work to students as well in consultation with the field instructor, which may include selection of service recipients to work with, projects, and other experiences. They may provide consultation and supervision of tasks as needed, and they may review student documentation and reports. They also may monitor student progress and collaborate and consult regarding the student's performance. We would also expect agency mentors to assist with the orientation process for students and ensure students have access to the resources needed within the agency. We previously discussed the various roles of those involved in field education. Scherer and Peleg-Oren used the term learning triangle to bring clarity to those involved in the field education process. The learning triangle was elaborated on by Larkin to create a visual similar to that on the slide. On this slide is a Venn diagram with 3 overlapping circles. One circle is the university, with roles such as field education coordinator and field liaison. Another circle is the student, and the other circle is the agency, with roles of field instructor and agency mentor if applicable. The concept identified that all those involved in field education, the university, the student, and the agency play a part in developing the professional social worker. This is one of the unique aspects of field education. All these vital players have unique roles, responsibilities, and expectations, yet come together to function as a whole to form the basis and vision of field education. So, social work's signature pedagogy. So now we're going to talk about the required practice experiences for students. Practice experience requirements differ depending on whether students are completing a practicum at a field setting focused on practice with individuals, families, and groups, or field settings focused on organizational, community, and policy practice. We will now discuss what those practice requirements are. Students are required to deliver one verbal presentation. The presentation is something we often get questions about from students and field instructors. There's a lot of flexibility with the topic of the presentation, so students and field instructors can be creative, not only to meet the students' learning goals, but to meet a need of the agency as well. It has to be approximately 20 minutes in length, and you and the field instructor will agree on what the topic is going to be. Many times, the field instructor or agency mentor or another team member may have some items that have been sitting on the side of their desk that they haven't been able to get to. These pieces of work are often great learning for a student. If you are completing a project, researching a topic, or a policy for the agency, that can also be the topic of your presentation, so keep that in mind. For example, if you are doing research on trauma-informed practice, then you can do a presentation to your team about trauma-informed practice. Or if you are doing an environmental scan of what similar agencies are doing nationally, then you can present your findings. Some students have also planned team building activities and ran those activities with the team. Other students may be involved in developing a program or policy analysis and may present on that. The options are pretty endless. You can also partner with another student to complete your presentation. Students would just have to present for approximately 20 minutes each. If you have any questions about the presentation, don't hesitate to reach out to your field liaison. We would also like you to attend agency meetings, in-service sessions, anything at all is related to the agency if it's appropriate. This could be team meetings, committees your field instructor is involved in, team planning days, training opportunities, an annual general meeting, just to name a few. Students are also required to complete a minimum of 4 agency visits during their practicum. Please ensure to discuss the agency visits with your field instructor, particularly as you are developing your learning contract. You can work together to determine what agencies may best meet your learning goals, as well as support the work you are doing at the agency. For example, what agencies are relevant to the work at the agency, the population at the agency, what agencies does your practicum agency refer to or work closely with. Agency visits are an excellent way to continue building connections with the community, gain varying perspectives, and enhance the work you are doing at your own agency and much more. Some agencies may provide an on-site agency visit, while others may provide an information session virtually. Some agencies may go ahead and put together an information session for students, but typically students would have to arrange a visit with an agency on their own. One thing we do strongly recommend is visiting an agency as a group. In other words, agencies would prefer to not have one student contacting them one day and then another student contacting them the next. If you have a class group chat, communicate amongst yourselves that you are arranging an agency visit. Agencies will greatly appreciate this. Another important thing to keep in mind is that if you commit to an agency visit, please try to best to keep that commitment. We've heard of situations in the past That an agency is expecting 10 students, put effort into arranging staff to meet with all the students, and even buying food and providing beverages, and only having one student show up. If you are ill or an urgent situation has come up, that is completely understandable, but it would be important to keep your commitment if at all possible. The following slide speaks to required practice experiences for students completing their practicum in field settings focused on practice with individuals, families, and groups. You would be engaged in at least one project. As mentioned, it's important to keep in mind that the project can inform your presentation. The project and presentation do not have to be connected, but many students do connect their project and presentation. As with the presentation, there's a lot of flexibility with this project, so you and your field instructor can be creative. Students can do a community development project, policy analysis, research, program development, proposal writing, and committee work. The project typically not only meets some of the students' learning goals, but can also build upon capacity within an agency. Many field instructors and agency mentors have items that they would like to get to, and this is a great opportunity to not only meet your learning goals, but also the needs of the agency and team. Is there a topic or resources your team would like to know more about? Are there policies or programs that need to be updated? Is your agency trying to do an environmental scan of what other similar agencies are doing? Is your agency trying to develop resources for service users, such as posters, pamphlets, or social media or website content? Is there a proposal that they've been trying to get time to write, or projects on a committee that they haven't been able to get to? All these examples are excellent learning opportunities. As with the presentation, the project options are also quite endless. Students involved with individuals, families, and or groups would be engaging in direct practice with a minimum of 5 different individuals, families, and or groups. You will likely be working with more than that, but it would be a minimum of 5, and the length of time working with service users could be a very short period of time, depending on the agency and its mandate, or it could be for a longer period of time throughout the term, and that would be fine as well. The practice activities are listed on the following slide. This slide speaks to examples of practice activities with individuals, families, and groups. These examples are intended to illustrate the range of practice activities students may encounter during practicum and are not meant to be exhaustive. Learning opportunities will vary across practicum settings. Students are not expected to complete every activity. Rather, they should engage in experiences that align with their learning goals, practicum setting, and available learning opportunities. There is no specific requirement for the number of practice activities or time spent with service users. They will vary among placements, and 2 students in the same agency likely will have different opportunities for working with service users. So some examples of practice activities include screening, intake, assessment or risk assessment, referral, advocacy, resource coordination, supportive counseling, adjustment counseling, change focused counseling, psychoeducational interventions, substance use or misuse counseling, social skill or life skill development, conflict resolution intervention, family intervention, group work, case management, or it could be discharge planning. Students completing their practicum in field settings focus on organizational, community, and policy practice are required to engage in organizational, community, and or policy practice through a minimum of 2 different types of practice activities. As noted previously, examples of practice activities are intended to illustrate the range of practice activities students may encounter during practicum and are not meant to be exhaustive. Learning opportunities will vary across different practicum settings, and students are not expected to complete every activity on this list. Rather, they should engage in experiences aligned with their learning goals, the practicum setting, and available learning opportunities. So examples of some of the learning activities would be program or event learning, marketing, implementation, and evaluation. Could be group work, could be team committee or board work, task force or advocacy group involvement, coalition formulation and maintenance, meso or macro level advocacy, community analysis, community organizing, needs assessment, leadership development, staff development, policy analysis and development, could be issue analysis, organizational assessment and development, could be networking, research and program evaluation, financial resource development, plan change techniques, resource development, public education, or presentations. All students have the following required practicum documentation. Each requirement will be explained further shortly. The required practicum documentation includes timesheet and field instruction record, which is completed in IPT, the daily log or planner documenting use of practicum time, critical reflection journals, which also includes the week 2 learning contract development and reflection, as well as student self-assessments. And the self-assessments are the initial student self-assessment, the student midterm self-assessment and reflection, the student final self-assessment and reflection, as well as field setting documentation and professional writing as required. The first type of practicum documentation you must complete during your practicum is your timesheet and field instruction record, which is found in IPT. Additional information regarding IPT can be found in the BSW IPT manual found on the Field Education website. Here is an example of what the timesheet and field instruction record looks like in IPT. Please follow the written directions carefully. You will be recording your time and your practicum, as well as your field instructor time with your field instructor each week. The text on the screen may look slightly different by September, but overall will be quite similar. As noted in IPT, in the hours of practice rows, please record the total number of hours you were at your practicum each day. In the hours of supervision rows, please record the number of hours you received field instruction each week. Students should have a minimum of 1 hour of dedicated field instruction time per week. You do not need to record informal daily supervision, only your weekly field instruction block. Your hours of supervision should already be counted in your hours of practice, so please do not count twice. Students keep track of their hours on a weekly basis. They then total their practicum and field instruction hours at the midterm and final. Then, at the midterm and final, the timesheet and field instruction record are signed in IPT by the student, field instructor, and the agency mentor if applicable. Students are expected to keep a daily log during their practicum. Daily logs are designed to assist students in tracking their activities on a daily basis. They are also quite helpful during field instruction. There is no set format for a daily log. However, students often use an electronic calendar or diary such as Outlook Calendar or may use a written daily planner. Students can discuss their preferred format for the daily log with their field instructor and agency mentor, if applicable. The daily logs are only viewed by the field instructor and agency mentor, except in exceptional circumstances where the field liaison would have access. During the practicum, all students will be completing self-assessments at the beginning of the practicum, at the midterm point, and at the end of the practicum. These self-assessments are called the initial student self-assessment, the student midterm self-assessment and reflection, and the student final assessment and reflection. All of these documents only need to be submitted to the field instructor and agency mentor. It is important to retain a copy, however, in case these documents are requested by the field team. Students will complete the initial student self-assessment at the beginning of the practicum. It is submitted to the field instructor and agency mentor prior to the first field instruction session, typically at least 24 hours in advance or an agreed upon time between the student and the field instructor. The initial student self-assessment provides an opportunity for students to reflect on the learning before beginning practicum. It is intended to help students identify their strengths, experiences, and learning goals and support needs, reflect on their goals for practicum, consider the types of support that will help them succeed, begin building a collaborative working relationship with their field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, and provide a foundation for developing the learning contract, which will be discussed later in the orientation. More detail regarding format for responses can be found on the initial student self-assessment document. The next self-assessment that students will complete is the midterm self-assessment and reflection. Students will complete this at the midpoint of the practicum and will typically submit this document to their field instructor and agency mentor 1 week prior to the midterm evaluation meeting, or an agreed upon time by the student and field instructor. The midterm self-assessment and reflection provides students with an opportunity to pause, reflect, and discuss their learning midway through the practicum. It is intended to support ongoing learning, collaboration, by encouraging students to reflect on progress toward the learning outcomes identified in the learning contract, recognize accomplishments, strengths, and areas for professional growth, identify learning priorities and any adjustments to learning activities for the remainder of the practicum, reflect on the practicum experience, including the field setting and the field instruction process, and to contribute to collaborative planning for the remainder of the practicum. The midterm self-assessment and reflection is intended to support collaborative discussion during the midterm evaluation meeting. Students' reflections may be referenced within the field instructor's midterm evaluation to acknowledge progress, highlight strengths, and identify priorities for continued learning. The midterm self-assessment and reflection is intended to support honest reflection and collaborative discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. Meaningful reflection on accomplishments, challenges, and learning priority is encouraged. More detail regarding format for responses can be found on the midterm student self-assessment and reflection document. The last self-assessment you'll be completing is the final self-assessment and reflection. You will complete this at the end of the practicum and will typically submit this document to your field instructor and agency mentor 1 week prior to the final evaluation meeting, or an agreed upon time by the student and the field instructor. The final student self-assessment and reflection provides students with an opportunity to reflect on their learning, professional development, and overall practicum experience as they prepare to complete their first practicum. It is intended to support students in reflecting on progress towards the learning outcomes identified in the learning contract, recognizing accomplishments, strengths, and areas of professional growth, considering how their knowledge, skills, values, and professional identity have developed throughout the practicum, identifying priorities for continued learning and future practicum experiences, and supporting a sense of closure through reflection on their overall practicum experience. The final student self-assessment and reflection is intended to support collaborative discussion during the final evaluation meeting. Students' reflections may be referenced within the field instructor's final evaluation to acknowledge learning, highlight strengths, and identify priorities for continued professional development. The self-assessment is intended to support honest reflection and a collaborative discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. Meaningful reflection on accomplishments, challenges, and professional growth is encouraged. Once again, more detail regarding format for responses can be found on the final student self-assessment and reflection document. Now we're going to move along to the outcomes of the practicum and the learning contract. During the field practicum, students' learning is based on 5 overall outcomes or expectation areas. They are 1. Field setting and community context, 2. Teaching and learning context, 3. Theory and practice, 4. Self-awareness, and 5. Professional context. When you look at the learning contract, which we'll be talking about shortly, it is based on these outcomes that students are expected to develop knowledge and skill in. Further detailed information can also be found in the Field Education Manual. Now we are going to discuss the learning contract. The learning contract is one of the first tasks completed during practicum. It serves as a roadmap for learning throughout the practicum by identifying what the student hopes to learn, how learning will occur, opportunities for feedback and supervision, and priorities for ongoing growth. The learning contract is developed collaboratively by the student and the field instructor and the agency mentor where applicable. It is led by the student. It is individualized to the practicum setting, and it is a living document that may be revised throughout the practicum as learning opportunities evolve. It also clarifies the roles and responsibilities of the student, field instructor, and agency mentor where applicable throughout the practicum, and helps ensure the student has opportunities to develop and demonstrate social work values, knowledge, and skills for each identified outcome. A well-developed learning contract supports intentional learning, meaningful supervision discussions, and ongoing reflection throughout the practicum. The next slide speaks to the students' responsibilities in regards to the learning contract. So students are expected to take the lead in developing a draft learning contract by reflecting on learning goals and areas for growth, identify learning activities and individualized learning objectives, or ILOs, discussing and refining the draft with the field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, as well as entering the finalized learning contract into IBT. The student's also responsible for revising the learning contract as needed based on feedback from the field instructor, agency mentor where applicable, and the field liaison, and revisiting the learning contract throughout the practicum. We're now going to talk about learning contract resources. So resources have been developed to support students in developing their learning contract, both of which will be discussed shortly. Both of these documents can be found on the Field Education website. So one of the resources is the Guide to Developing a Strong Learning Contract, and the other is the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection. So the first resource we're going to talk about is a guide to developing a strong learning contract. And this is an optional resource to support students in developing a meaningful learning contract. It includes practical guidance, planning prompts, examples, and writing tips for developing learning activities and individualized learning objectives. Students may use this guide when completing the Week 2 learning contract development and reflection, and throughout the practicum when revisiting or refining their learning contract. The next document we're going to discuss is the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection. So that provides students with an opportunity to begin developing their individualized learning contract while reflecting on their initial experiences in practicum. It is intended to help students develop a draft learning contract by identifying individualized learning goals, learning activities, and areas for professional growth, as well as identifying learning activities that support the learning contract outcomes. As well, it allows students to begin to connect classroom learning with practice experiences, reflect on their early practicum experiences, and prepare for ongoing field instruction, supervision, and critical reflection throughout the practicum. On the slide are the minimum requirements for the learning contract. These minimum requirements apply to each of the 5 learning outcomes, so students may identify additional activities or learning objectives based on their learning needs and available practicum opportunities. So as you can see in the table, students must identify a minimum of 2 learning activities that support achievement of the overall learning outcome. Students must identify a minimum of 1 individualized learning objective related to the overall learning outcome, as well as a minimum of 2 learning activities that support achievement of your individualized learning objective. As mentioned previously, students are expected to take the lead in preparing the draft learning contract, which will then be reviewed, discussed, and refined collaboratively with the field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, before being finalized in IPT. Students should submit the completed Week 2 learning contract development and reflection to their field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, typically at least 24 hours before the Week 2 scheduled field instruction session, or according to another mutually agreed upon timeline. Students should retain a copy of the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection, as it may be requested by the field education team. Once the student and their field instructor and agency mentor have agreed upon the individualized learning objectives and learning activities, the student would then enter them into IPT by the 15th day of the practicum. The student and their field instructor and agency mentor then sign the learning contract in IPT. The signed learning contract is then reviewed and signed by your field liaison. There is a possibility that the field liaison may suggest revisions, as the responsibility for final approval of the learning contract rests with your field liaison. As previously noted, the learning contract is a working document and may be revised throughout the practicum. Any updates must be reflected in the most current version uploaded to IPT. We're now going to talk about the critical reflection journals. So the Field Practicum Critical Reflection Journal is intended to support ongoing learning, meaningful dialogue, and reflective supervision throughout the practicum. It is not intended to be completed as a weekly checklist. Rather, it serves as a flexible tool to help students and field instructors identify significant learning experiences, monitor progress, and guide field instruction discussions. The Critical Reflection Journal is designed to serve as a tool to prepare for and develop the agenda for field instruction sessions, foster open communication with the field instructor and agency mentor if applicable, support ongoing reflection on learning contract outcomes and practicum requirements, strengthen the integration of classroom learning and practice, promote critical thinking, self-awareness, and professional identity development, encourage reflection on the broader social, political, cultural, organizational, and historical contexts that shape social work practice, as well as support ethical and anti-oppressive social work practice. The next slide speaks to using the critical reflection journals. So the journal is intended to be flexible and individualized. Students are not expected to respond to every reflection question each week. Instead, they should select the question that best supports reflection on the most significant learning experiences, challenges, successes, or questions that emerge during that stage of the practicum. Over the course of the practicum, students should vary the questions they respond to in consultation with the field instructor and agency mentor so that learning contract outcomes are addressed while avoiding repetitive reflections. Questions may be revisited throughout the practicum, that's not an issue. However, responses should demonstrate new learning, deeper understanding, or continued professional growth rather than repeating previous reflections. The goal is depth rather than length. Meaningful reflection moves beyond describing what happened to considering why an experience was significant, what was learned, how it relates to social work knowledge and values, and how it may influence future practice. Responses may be written in point form or brief paragraphs, so some students find it helpful to express their learning through more detailed written reflections before field instruction, while others prefer to record brief notes and explore their thinking more fully through discussion during supervision. Both approaches are appropriate when they support meaningful reflection and preparation for field instruction. As previously said, students are expected to receive a minimum of 1 hour of field instruction each week. So field instruction may include review of the critical reflection journal, written and or verbal feedback, and discussion between the student and the field instructor, and agency mentor may be involved as well. Students who complete more detailed written reflections may require less discussion of those topics during the supervision meeting, while students who provide briefer written reflections may use more of the supervision time to verbally explore their learning. The next slide speaks to critical reflection journal submission guidelines. So critical reflection journals are completed during each designated week of practicum as identified in the significant dates document. So the significant dates document can also be found on the field education website. The critical reflection journals are submitted to the field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, typically at least 24 hours before the scheduled field instruction session, or according to another mutually agreed upon time between the student and the field instructor and agency mentor. Students should retain copies of all critical reflection journals as they may be requested by the field education team. Students do not submit the critical reflection journals to their field liaison unless they are requested to do so. We will now discuss some helpful resources and tips to support students in writing the critical reflection journal. So one of those resources is the Field Education Resource Manual, and it should hopefully be a very helpful document for students. This resource package provides a brief overview of primary principles, values, theories, perspectives, knowledge, approaches, and practice skills that social work students are taught in social work and non-social work courses during the Bachelor of Social Work program at MUN. The resource is intended to support students, field instructors, and agency coordinators in integrating classroom learning with practicum experience. It is designed to complement field instruction discussions and a critical reflection journal by assisting students in connecting theory, practice, professional values, ethical decision making, and reflective practice. You will also be referring to your learning contract throughout the practicum, as well as the CSW Code of Ethics. Many students find it helpful to record brief notes or reflections throughout the week as experiences occur, rather than trying to remember everything immediately before field instruction. These notes can make critical reflection journals more manageable and support richer discussions during field instruction. We will now be discussing the final practicum documentation requirement, which is field setting documentation and professional writing. Students are expected to develop documentation and professional writing skills throughout their practicum. Documentation requirements vary across practice settings, however, students should become familiar with common forms of agency documentation and professional writing. Various examples of agency documentation and professional writing can be found in the Field Education Resource Manual, including examples of professional communication, service user documentation, reports, and administrative documentation. Some additional important information to keep in mind is that field setting documentation is the property of the field setting, and that agency documentation must be read and signed by field instructors and agency mentors for legal purposes. Feedback from field instructors and agency mentors will assist students in developing a professional social work writing style appropriate for agency records. The remaining slides will discuss the evaluations that are completed during the practicum. Additional information about the evaluations can be found in the BSW Field Education Manual. These evaluations include the midterm evaluation of the student, the final evaluation of the student, and the student evaluation of the field practicum. So let's just talk a little bit more about the evaluations for the student. It's important to remember that your evaluation starts with the learning contract, so it actually does start at the beginning of the practicum. Although the midterm and the final are the formal evaluation periods, evaluation is meant to be an ongoing process. Completing critical reflection journals and the self-assessments are an excellent time to reflect on your own progress. Weekly field instruction sessions are also a great time to check in with your field instructor and get their feedback on your strengths, areas you can grow, and where you are in this practicum process. Ideally, any feedback at the midterm and final evaluation shouldn't be a surprise if you and your field instructor are engaged in open communication throughout your practicum. It really comes back to approaching the practicum as an adult learner, engaging in your own critical reflection, strengthening your self-awareness, and asking and being open to feedback, not just from your field instructor, but from other team members as well. We will get into the midterm and final evaluation processes in the following slides. However, it is important to know that your field instructor is responsible for writing the evaluation. Evaluation for both the midterm and the final evaluation are based on a number of factors. It's based on the student's self-assessments that you complete at the beginning of the practicum, at the midterm, and at the end of the practicum, and also the required practicum documentation, such as the timesheet and supervision record, the daily log, critical reflection journals, as well as field setting documentation and professional writing. Your learning contract and your performance, as well as we also look at the School of Social Work Suitability Policy. So if you're not familiar with that policy, you can go to the School of Social Work website to view that. The field instructor also typically engages with other team members, get their feedback, and could also ask volunteers and service users as well. As well, students must also abide by the CSW Code of Ethics, which I'm sure you are all familiar with by now. Now let's talk a bit about the rating scale that we use on the midterm and final evaluation. The learning contract is a living document that we use, and it is the one document that has everything in it, the learning contract, the midterm, and the final. So basically, in the first practicum, BSW students are expected to be at a beginning level of competence. However, by the end of the practicum, we expect students to meet all the outcomes indicated in the learning contract. The grading choices for the midterm and final evaluations include meets expectations, so that's ME, needs improvement, which is NI, is not meeting expectations, which is NM, or not yet observed, which is NYO. In terms of meeting expectations, we know that students are consistently demonstrating acceptable level of theory and skills, creativity, critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. In terms of needs improvement, the student is demonstrating a minimal level of theory and skills, creativity, critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. And basically, with not meeting expectations, the student is failing to demonstrate a minimal level of theory and skills, creativity, critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. For not yet observed, this would indicate that the student has not yet had sufficient opportunity to demonstrate theory and skills, creativity and critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. This rating may only be used for the midterm evaluation and is not available for the final evaluation. As well, we ask field instructors to provide qualitative feedback on your performance in the comment and summary sections of the midterm and final evaluations. This could include your strengths, areas for growth, and areas for future learning. All of these things will be really helpful to you for your own development and your knowledge and skills in the field of social work. First, we'll be talking about the midterm evaluation. The midterm typically occurs at about week 6 of the practicum, so about the halfway point. The midterm evaluation is completed by the field instructor, typically in consultation with other team members, whether that be an agency mentor, volunteers, or clients if appropriate. The midterm evaluation will summarize the student's activities in the practicum, the student's strengths and areas for improvement, general level of student competence in regards to social work values, knowledge, and skills at that point of evaluation, plans for student activities and emphasis from the midterm to the end of the practicum, as well as students' needs for learning and development and requisite learning opportunities. Prior to the midterm evaluation, students are required to complete the midterm self-assessment and reflection, which can be found on the field education website. Students are asked to submit this to their field instructor 1 week prior to the midterm evaluation meeting or an agreed upon date with the field instructor. The field instructor and agency mentor, if applicable, completes a draft in the midterm evaluation using the learning contract. Field instructors are encouraged to include components of the student's midterm self-assessment and reflection in the midterm evaluation in IPT. A formal evaluation takes place, usually during a regularly scheduled field instruction session. This would include the field instructor and student and the agency mentor if applicable. We usually recommend field instructors to provide students with a draft of the evaluation 24 hours in advance of this meeting to give students the opportunity to reflect on the evaluation. Following the meeting, the field instructor would finalize the evaluation in IPT, and the student, field instructor, and agency mentor then electronically sign the evaluation in IPT. If for some reason there are any concerns, the field instructor would clearly document them and discuss them with the student. More than likely, the field liaison would then meet with the student and the field instructor. We would talk about any particular concerns and areas of growth and develop a plan together to work toward meeting the outcomes and expectations of the practicum during the second half. So now we're going to talk about the final evaluation. So as would be expected, the final evaluation occurs at the end of the practicum, typically during the last week. The process for the final evaluation is very similar to the midterm evaluation. Similar to the midterm evaluation, students are required to complete the final self-assessment and reflection, which can be found on the field education website. Students are asked to submit this to their field instructor 1 week prior to the final evaluation meeting or an agreed upon date with the field instructor. The field instructor would write up a draft of the final evaluation and provide the student with some time to review it, often 24 hours in advance. The field instructor and student would then meet to discuss the final evaluation, typically during the final field instruction session. Usually, when writing the evaluation, the field instructor seeks additional input from the agency mentor if applicable, as well as other team members, volunteers, and possibly even service users. If the student has an agency mentor, the agency mentor would typically be present during the evaluation meeting as well. Field instructors are also encouraged to include content from the student's final self-assessment and reflection in the student's final evaluation in IPT. Some questions the final evaluation usually addresses include: were all the goals met? Has the student completed the minimum expected outcomes? What are the final thoughts about the student and the practicum experience? What are the student's strengths? As well as suggestions for the next practicum. What type of agency or client population may be a good fit? What types of skills does the student still need to work on? What are some gaps in the student's knowledge? As well as what are areas for future professional development? And the evaluation may also address the student's suitability for the profession. Following the final evaluation meeting, the final evaluation must be signed and dated electronically in IPT by the student, field instructor, and agency mentor if applicable. It is also important to keep in mind that many field instructors often use the final evaluation as a foundation for future professional references. So there is an evaluation of the agency and the field instructor as well. Verbal feedback is provided by the student during the practicum, but the student has an opportunity to complete an evaluation form after the final evaluation of the student is submitted. It is only shared with the field instructor if the student agrees, unless the SCWK Code of Ethics is breached. If the code is breached, the concerns must be addressed to the field liaison and through the agency. Throughout the orientation, we discuss various field education resources. To bring all the resources together, you can find the following field education resources on the school's field website. So those resources be the BSW Field Education Manual, the Field Education Resource Manual, Guide for Developing a Strong Learning Contract, the checklist for field instructors and agency mentors, the checklist for students, as well as the significant dates documents, and the user guide for IPT. A number of the practicum documents can also be found on the school's field website, such as the initial student self-assessment, the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection, the Critical Reflection Journal, the Student Midterm Self-Assessment and Reflection, and the Student Final Self-Assessment and Reflection. The rest of the forms are completed in IPT, which we will now discuss. As you know, our intern practicum tracking database, or IPT for short, is a database that allows students, field instructors, agency mentors, and field education coordinators to efficiently and effectively complete an administrative task related to field education. This includes keeping relative practicum and contact information up to date and accessing and completing forms online. We have a helpful IPT manual and IPT tutorial videos available that should hopefully give you a good refresher on how to use IPT and complete the field practicum forms. As previously said, they are available on the school's website. Before we get into the forms, it is important to bring up the importance of keeping your contact information up to date, particularly your emergency contact in case a medical emergency happens during your practicum and your field instructor or field liaison needs to contact them. It is also helpful to upload a picture of yourself into IPT if you have not already done so. Now we'll move into the forms that are completed in IPT. First, we'll list the forms that are completed in IPT by the student, which include the BSW student application for field practicum and the BSW student brief resume. So you would have put these in prior to your placement. The forms completed in IPT by the student and field instructor include the timesheet and field instruction record, the learning contract, the midterm evaluation, and the final evaluation. And both the student and field instructor complete an evaluation of the practicum in IPT. Students have also been asked to be aware of agency policies and procedures, to become familiar with them and understand what they mean. CASW stresses the importance of confidentiality when working with clients, and as a student, we ask that you are respectful of confidential client information and handle it appropriately. We also ask that students be familiar with the social media policy and guidelines for social work students. Social media was never an issue years ago, but now it is. So we ask that you become familiar with the social media policy and take a look at your own social media and whatever you have out there in the World Wide Web and see whether or not it is appropriate. Private cell phone usage at the agency should not be occurring. Keep in mind that if you wish to look at apps, check social media, or check personal email, etc., that should be done during your break time, which would include breaks or at lunchtime. Keep in mind boundaries. Think about what the Code of Ethics says about boundaries and make sure that if you have any questions at all that you discuss it with your field instructor, staff at the agency, or your field liaison. It is important that you are appropriately dressed when you are at the agency. Take your leave from your field instructor and from the other agency staff. And there may be times where it is completely appropriate for you to be wearing jeans, but just take the lead from them. Also keep in mind, from a safety point of view, the agency may have some requirements around the type of dress that you use, such as footwear. If you are not going to be at the agency, please make sure that you let your field instructor know and any appropriate staff that they have designated. It's important for them to know that you are not going to be there. A lot of things happen in communities these days, and sometimes the media would like to get some information or a comment. You are at your agency as a student, so if you're approached by the media for a comment over an issue that is happening in the community, please keep in mind that you are there in that student role, and as the other agency staff, be that your field instructor or appropriate agency personnel who will be addressing these issues. You should be mindful of the fact that you are there as a student, and your role is to be there to learn, develop, and grow your social work skills and knowledge, not to respond to questions from the media. We have reached the final slide in the orientation. We hope that it was helpful. Reach out to a member of the field education team if you have any additional questions. Our academic program assistant, Felix, will be able to answer many of the questions you may have. If not, he will be able to connect you with the relevant field education coordinator. Meanwhile, your field liaison will be in touch early in the semester and you can contact them as needed. If you have any questions about your practicum, be sure to let your liaison know so they can work with you to answer any questions you might have. Thanks again.